Hey, this is Harry, and I just saw Frankenstein a few days ago, the new film from Guillermo del Toro. I wanted to talk about what I don't like about it, and obviously I'll I'll praise it to some degree as well. The movie tries to combine a bunch of different kind of genres into one movie, which I found frustrating, and it begins with an action scene set in the Arctic, feels very Northman or even like to some degree an Arctic set like Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, very violent kind of medieval Europe, like Vikings against Normans kind of scene. And then we get into Frankenstein's backstory. Victor Frankenstein, not Frankenstein's monster, but the man himself. And we see his disciplinarian father, played by Charles Dance. We see all this from a boy's point of view. This is when he was really young. And his father doesn't praise or love him or show fatherly affection for him when he's curious or when he makes a little mistake or when he wants to play or whatever. He beats him, whips him, um, when he doesn't get biology lessons right, physiology lessons right. And Guillermo del Toro is really trying to say, like, this is where it begins. This is where this guy went wrong. His dad was a disciplinarian, and so he turned bad. And that's just hit really, really hard in this movie, to the degree that it's not really dramatized, and so that you see behind the eyes of this child actor him starting to form an attitude towards life that's unhealthy and that and solves problems with violence. It's more like somebody who's just resentful and who vows to be a better doctor than his father, and to conquer death. It's not really clear how him wanting to conquer death leads to him experimenting and suturing together different body parts and trying to reanimate a corpse, though. That's not the same as bringing his mother back to life, right? So there's this fundamental problem, I think, that the movie has, which that it's trying to say, like, this was the original wound and the trauma, and now he's trying to reverse that by creating some, you know, transferring some body parts from dead soldiers from dead to alive. That just doesn't affect his mom though. So it's a big problem at the heart of this movie, and Del Toro thinks he's like arrived at some profound insight into toxic masculinity or whatever. This movie is also very coded as like old European men of the past needed to go to therapy or they needed to be more embrace their feminine side or whatever. And a lot of movies have read history that way, and it's a pretty silly way of reading history. I think it's pretty uninteresting dramatically, and it's just obviously kind of architected out. The movie feels very staged, and it doesn't feel like you're jumping around in time so often that every scene is like, oh, he just wants us to take away this one heavy-handed moralizing message about the importance of being a loving father or the importance of not trying to play God and so on. And the whole movie really feels like that. The dialogue is pretty bad, pretty blunt. It's a lot of like, Father, I'll never be like you. I want to be a great doctor and save women or whatever. It's a lot of like people just stating the themes of the movie. Then the movie moves into this kind of age of discovery thing set in Edinburgh, and Oscar Isaac is there demonstrating his new scientific experiments. It feels a little like The Prestige or The Illusionist, or Nosferatu had some of this as well, last year's movie, with Willem Dafoe's scientist and so on. Um, this kind of intersection of like philosophy and science and trying to understand how to transform the world with electricity and light and so on. And obviously, this plays into the Scottish, Enlightenment and Nikola Tesla out in Eastern Europe and all that stuff, and all the stuff that the Prestige is about. Um, the movie doesn't spend that much time here, and it doesn't really linger on the plans. You see Frankenstein drawing up all these plans of how to you know, patch different body parts together and what the lymphatic system is and the neural system and how he's gonna, make little adjustments to the spinal column and then inject it with tons of electricity and bring this man he's promising to build to life. And I really like that vibe. I like this time period. I like movies set in Scotland in the 1800s or London in the late 1800s, like The Prestige, or across parts of Europe in that time period as well, when there's a lot being discovered. I would love to see a great TV series about this, like written by Philip Pullman or somebody like that, or Philippa Gregory, or even the woman who wrote Susanna Clark, who wrote Doctor, um, Strange Case of Jekyll and Hyde. She wrote an update on that, and she's written some other great sci-fi books. I'd love to see that and directed by like Steven Soderbergh or somebody who made The Nick or some film or TV series that really delves into the development of ideas within this culture, within this discipline in the 1800s, because it was a fascinating period when so much was being discovered. Unfortunately, this movie kind of just brushes over that, and we get introduced to Christoph Waltz, who's awful in this movie. I really did not like him. He's kind of this like sniveling, kind of like timid old man who's actually balding and he has his own motivations, but he pretends to be generous and he does his like little of course, I just want to see your experiments. I'm all for you. I admire you, Mr. Frankenstein, and whatever. He has like this very kind of creepy way of behaving. The same role Christoph Waltz plays in every single movie. I mean, he's been cast in this role for like 10 years straight now. Just not great. Um, so he's there, and then obviously, about an hour into the movie, we get the creature brought to life. We see Oscar Isaac naked, sewing body parts together. And then there's a storm one night. He goes up to the top of his little tower and he sets up this metal contraption to funnel the electricity to get hit by lightning and then funnel it all down into the his creature. And Frankenstein comes to life and is really childlike, and then Victor turns on him. And the best part of the movie by far is about an hour and a half into the movie, probably at the start of the creature's tale. Frankenstein ends up telling his side of the story, and at one point he gets taken in. He runs away from Victor's little castle out in the snow in the Swiss Alps or wherever it is, and he gets to a family in France or Germany or somewhere, and they're this kind of farming family, very mild mannered, but there's this real like state of nature quality to it. Like they all have guns they need to defend against wolves who are trying to get their sheep, and they have like really limited supplies of food and animals and so on. And those are so valuable to them. And so they're ruthless with visitors and with animals that come to call. And it's this fascinating portrait of this family that's so warm and affectionate to each other in their own home, and then who's so harsh on outsiders who threaten to take any of what they have because what they have is so precious, right? And it's really how life was supposed to be and how a lot of people still think, and maybe more people should think, right? That you care so much for your own family and they're the ones you trust, but you set up like a real, you know, barrier between you and any kind of government or empire or wild other culture or whatever who might have totally different values than yours. And it's a real kind of portrait of a state of nature and how the family unit evolved as this division of labor out of the state of nature, and how kids are already raising animals and they need to chase off the wolves, and they 10-year-old boys are so hardy already and they can pick up many gallons worth of milk and transport it, and they transport water from streams and lakes miles away, and they're so diligent and so enmeshed in the family life already and doing their work, and that's fascinating. And the dialogue is still really heavy-handed. Frankenstein has this line where he says, "Oh, the wolves did not hate the sheep, and the farmers did not hate those wolves, but they needed to, do violence to each other because of their interests. This is the way of the world. People, hurt each other and kill each other every day just to survive." He's really talking about this state of nature type scenario. And that part of the movie is fascinating. There is some terrible CGI, like the wolves themselves and some of the backdrops of these like cornfields or long stretching, hills and horizon lines, just like really screensaver type stuff. Really doesn't look great. But there is other really cool shots, and Del Toro obviously was really interested in this part of the movie. I think it was a mistake to take an hour to get to the creature being created, and then Frankenstein turns on his own creature so quickly. He gets so impatient and starts mocking him for learning slowly and for not having, the advanced mind of an adult male, but the kind of mind of a child, even maybe retarded, relative to the mind of a child. Um, that took so long to get to creating the creature that then Frankenstein turning on him and setting fire to the castle where he's in happened really quickly, and then the creature's tale happens quite quickly. But it's the best part of the movie, and Jacob Elordi is the best actor in this movie. But yeah, really disappointing how CGI a lot of this movie looked. Guillermo del Toro talks incessantly about how important it is to preserve the experience of awe and wonder and movies and all this stuff, and it just didn't live by that in this movie. I mean, there's a lot of obvious CGI. Um, yeah, there's really cartoonish wolves. There's a lot of cartoonish stuff in this movie. But yeah, the movie becomes this kind of parable, fable, really deep inquiry into human nature and the process of socialization and of first understanding violence as a tool and so on. And that part of the movie is the most interesting. And then after that, I won't spoil too much, but it resolves with the creature and Victor kind of apologizing to each other for various things that they did. Victor is just the straight up villain of this movie. Like he's just a terrible guy, and obviously it relates back to this idea that his dad was bad, and so he turned into a bad man. Um, to me, that's pretty uninteresting, and I think that's one of the big problems with this movie. I did not like Oscar Isaac performance in this movie at all, and obviously he's a phenomenal actor. We've been you know, absolutely loving him since he was in Drive and Inside Llewyn Davis and A Most Violent Year and Ex Machina and a lot of really interesting movies from around the 2010s. And then he went into all this franchise stuff, right? He was in Star Wars and X-Men and Dune and Moon Knight, the Marvel series, and um, it's been kind of tough to root, for some of the roles he's been in, but he's always good until now. He's just so over the top. He's like this mad scientist, but his role really calls for somebody who's a brilliant scientist, which I don't think you really get the impression that he's that smart in this movie. He just seems sort of loud and like, annoyed and manipulative. Um, and then, yeah, the toxicity or the like anger that comes from him, jealousy. Um, I don't think there's much of a kind of root source of that either that we see. His performance just doesn't give us much insight. He's just kind of screaming the dialogue that Del Toro gave him scream, and a lot of it's pretty bad. And it all ends up with his brother saying, "You're the monster, Victor. You're the monster," which a lot of people have called out, deservedly so, as the least subtle moment in this movie, which is saying something. So, really weak main character, but Jacob Elordi does a great job as the creature. And Mia Goth is kind of interesting. She's just kind of like on the nose casting for like goth, revisionist, like feminist, you know, Regency woman. She's been in quite a few period pieces and horror movies playing the kind of like platonic ideal of a woman with like a dark side. You could definitely see her in something like Nosferatu playing the Lily Rose Depp character as well. She's very much in that phase of her career, and I think she did well in this movie, but not given that much to do. Not as good as Elordi. And again, I really disliked Christoph Waltz. So a lot of flaws in this movie and a lot of bad CGI, which is shocking because Del Toro talks so much about how much effort he makes to make really realistic looking visuals and how much he dislikes AI and dislikes CGI. And it's just shocking to see him not practice what he preaches so clearly in this movie. It was a huge problem for me. So, Big problems with this film. I think I'd recommend you see it overall because there are individual moments that really make you think. Obviously, Frankenstein is a story about a man trying to play God, and it's a story about the dangers of science, right? Of thinking you're creating something that you'll be fascinated to watch, and then it getting, it inheriting some of the bad traits of human nature, or just the only way it can adapt to live in the state of nature is to become even worse than most humans, and this monstrous thing. And whose responsibility is that, right? And how does the creator react to that? And the danger of playing God and so on. And so it's an interesting story, and I think Del Toro took the wrong things away from it. Like he took away, obviously this usual thing he has that humans are bad and the creature is good, and that's not the movie I wanted to see, and I think it was poorly executed. So I'd recommend you see it for a couple of great scenes, the Jacob Elordi performance, some beautiful music, but man, the first hour is pretty slow, and then it gets really rushed. And I think the whole thing needed to be rewritten and thought through better. Really looking forward to The Bride, the Maggie Gyllenhaal. It looks like feminist take on Frankenstein. Jesse Buckley and Christian Bale and Jake Gyllenhaal. Should be really cool. And yeah, a lot of bad versions of Frankenstein have been made. Like the Kenneth Branagh film was bad. I Frankenstein was bad. There was a Daniel Radcliffe, James McAvoy Frankenstein from like 10 years ago that I still haven't seen, but I've heard, pretty bad things about. Yeah, I'm curious to see The Bride, and I'm curious to see if there are other better adaptations in the works because it's such a relevant story. I mean, whether you want to, relate it to AI or just computer, machine-based learning in general, or just a lot of the technologies we have, like medical technologies, like space technology, robots, and so on, and like all these things that we're building that could grow beyond us, and the people building them don't seem to have great motivations, or they do. It starts with curiosity, but then goes wrong. Such a relevant story needs a better adaptation. This one didn't work.